So over the last few months, I've been on a little bit of a retro 3D printing kick, 3D printing a bunch of my favorite things from my childhood. So I figured this week, since I've already been 3D printing some cool Ninja Turtle things, let's take a toy-sized Krang from Ninja Turtles and make him life-sized. This would make for one creepy mask. Nikko Industries recently released a belt buckle Krang file that you can 3D print and wear as a belt buckle that I've seen a bunch of other people 3D printing, and I figured let's take that as our base file and see if we can start scaling this up to something absolutely enormous and see if we can make it into something that I can actually hang on my wall here in the studio. Now, before we get started with 3D printing anything, I want to take a look at the files to see what we're working with. Now, a lot of times the file that you might download is going to be completely solid. Thankfully, Nikko has this in individual parts that have been broken up so that if you have a multicolor 3D printer, you can easily print this. Well, since we're not going to be working with the multicolor printer, I need each of these parts individual that I can print separately and then assemble afterwards. So what I'm going to do is take this file over onto my iPad and bring it into Nomad Sculpt. And you could really do this in any 3D application, but this is the one that I prefer. And it's gonna allow me to take this in and see each individual part. And what I can do is start individually modifying those as needed to best fit this build. And since I need each of these parts to be printed separately and then pieced together afterwards, what we're gonna end up doing is taking the parts and then subtracting them from each other while duplicating them so that we can have them individually as well to print, but this way they'll actually fit inside of the part after we printed them. One thing that you can also do is individually scale those parts down ever so slightly as well before you print them so that they fit even better, because it's going to be a really tight tolerance. Now, when it comes to the eyes, I'm going to need to take those balls for the eyes and bury them into that back of Krang. So what I'm going to do is burrow out the back of his head so that we can get better access to those sockets, and hopefully this all fits. We'll see. Also, one other thing that I'm gonna do is remove part of the back of Krang's base, because I'm gonna try and flatten this as much as I can, but still leave the upper detail. I don't need it as big as it is when we end up scaling it up. We're gonna take the files and bring it on and start printing it over on the Elegoo Orange Storm Giga. This is gonna allow me to scale this file up to 800% of the original file size, and it's gonna allow us to print a ridiculously large version of Krang. Now, I also want to say a big thank you to Elegoo for sponsoring today's video. They are the makers of the Orange Storm Giga. I'm also printing some of the parts on the Elegoo Neptune 4 Plus, which obviously is a good bit smaller than the Giga, but allows you to really easily print large things like helmets or other cosplay pieces at home. And I'm also printing the eyeballs here over on the Mars 5 Ultra. If you're new to resin 3D printing, the Mars 5 Ultra might be the best starting place for you, and I would highly recommend taking a look at it. And if you're interested in more information about any of Elegoo's printers or products, you'll find links to those down below. Now, I printed Krang in this pink filament here at 0.32 layer height, and it does not look that great. And I think the problem is that there was a partial clog with this. So I'm very tempted in reprinting the actual print all over again to get a better result. But in order to do that, I'm gonna change the nozzle out with the spare that came with the Giga. I'm also gonna drop the layer height down to 0.28 layer height and reprint this all in about a day and a half. This honestly looks so much better than the original one that I printed that was a partial clog. I wish I would have known that before I started that print, that there was a partial clog in there, but it is what it is. It's 3D printed. Now, one thing that I did not realize when I initially started printing the base for this build is that I was printing it in orange, and after I re-looking at the reference images, yeah, everything is in yellow. So I'm gonna have to figure this one out. Now, before I get started with the painting process, one thing that I was interested in doing is potentially retaining some of the orange accents here from the filament. So I'm gonna just take some very thin masking tape here, some painter's tape, and start shoving that into the crevices. I'm not going for perfection with this build. I'm going for fun. This should look like something straight out of the cartoons that I watched when I was a kid. Now, what I'm gonna do next is actually take that orange base and we're gonna end up spray painting it yellow. So I have some paint and primer mixed together that I can use for this print. I'm not sure how this is gonna turn out, and I'm telling you right now, I'm already wanting to reprint it again in just straight up yellow filament, but we'll see how this goes. And after letting that dry overnight, I can remove some of the tape there, and I'm actually pretty happy with the results that I'm seeing here with the vibrant orange underneath the yellow. Now for the little circle areas here on the bottom, those are typically red that I see in all of the images. So what I'm gonna end up doing is just going into Orca Slicer and bringing in a basic cylinder and scaling it up to try and fit as best I can to that area of the print. And I'm gonna adjust the height down to 2 millimeters and then print that up in some red filament. And this looks really clean, and all we have to do is use some 3D gloop and I can just gloop that in place. Now to insert the eyes, this is gonna be a fun process here. I'm gonna end up dremeling away some of the backside because unfortunately the eyes are just too large and I probably should have burrowed away some more of the backside of Krang so that I could more easily insert those in. But what we can do is use the Dremel to remove some of the materials as well as my heat gun here to help really soften up the backside of Krang inside that opening there, and I can use my fingers to help mash that to the side and use the eyeballs to actually just press those into place. Now this might take a few attempts like I'm doing here to get this into the openings of the eye socket, but they eventually fit. Unfortunately, since it was such a tight fit, we have all these scuffs on the eyeballs that we will definitely be taking care of. And to do that, I'm just gonna use some Pledge Revive It. This is some polish that you can use on your floors, but it should work just as well on your resin 3D prints to remove any of those scuff or scratches. And sure enough, it's cleaned these up really nicely. Now for the teeth, I printed a whole bunch of different sizes of these because I just wasn't sure exactly which ones were gonna fit best. It ended up working when I scaled those down to about 85% of the original file size for those to be able to fit into the notches that we took from the original file. Even then, that still required me to Dremel away some of the materials, and I could then use some super glue to just glue those teeth in place. Those teeth are too sparkly white, so we're gonna use Hacksmith's lightsaber to tint those bad boys yellow or more or less burn them. What's also kind of cool is that the teeth are now glossy looking. Now, one thing I'm really not good at is airbrushing, so I'm gonna try and attempt to airbrush the veins in Krang's head, and I don't have any purple paint, so I'm gonna be mixing in a little bit of blue and red airbrush paint together and try and do this. And already this is off to a really bad start. And yeah, I have the air pressure up way too high. This is just going, yeah, as expected, not very good. And again, I'm not really thrilled with the look of the base. It's just kind of too glossy with the paint that I went with. I really couldn't find anything that was a matte paint. And in fact, I've decided I'm gonna just reprint the entire thing in yellow PLA as well. So if I wanna swap this out afterwards, I can do that. But I figured let's do something really fun and creative with this to really make this look like it was straight out of the cartoons by adding a cell shaded look to this. So all we're gonna do is just take a black Sharpie or some black paint and a paintbrush, and we can start going along the edges of the sharp corners and start adding some details to those. I don't think there's really any way that you can screw this up. The messier, the better. I'm just trying not to do solid black lines around the entire thing. So I'm doing it in section by section, leaving gaps in between sections. And here is our Krang. I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. I think the cell shading really saved the overall look for this for me. And going from that spray painted look to, I originally just wanted this to be all 3D printed and have this just be a really simple, awesome thing that I can hang up on the wall to show off how 3D printing is without having to do a lot of finishing on this. And honestly, I think this turned out pretty cool, and I've never done the cell shading look before. And if you haven't already tried it, I would definitely recommend giving it a shot. And it's a really fun way to add a different finish to your 3D prints. And as a reminder, here's the default Krang size. That's like almost toy size from Nikko Industries belt buckle, and scaled up now to 800%. It is just a massive wall piece that I'm excited to get hung up here. One thing that I'm gonna run into that I'm definitely gonna need to do is, I was thinking I would just be able to use some command strips on this. No, I'm definitely gonna need to get some anchors and some hooks to install on the back for this so that I can properly get it hung up there without worrying about it falling. If you're interested in printing one of these files for yourself, I'll have links over to Nikko Industries website for his file where you can get access to this and print it for yourself as the belt buckle, or do as I did and make it into a cool, fun piece of wall art, especially for any of you that grew up in the 90s like I did, obsessed with Ninja Turtles. I also want to say thank you to all my Patreon supporters for your continued support. If you're interested in things like the 3D printer settings that I used for these 3D prints, you can find those over in my Patreon. And let me know what kind of fun 3D printing project ideas you might have that relate to the 80s, cartoons, video games, you know, any of that fun stuff that I might have grown up with. Hey, thanks so much for watching, you all, and I'll see you next time. Bye now. Go figure, using a little bit of fire to melt your glossy teeth prints will make them look more realistic. I'm definitely gonna be using that in the future at some point. I wonder if I could end up wearing this as a belt. More like I need some suspenders or something like this. is so big. It is so big.